And when I say cultural capital, I mean things that are relevant to that position so that the hiring manager hears in your language that you're kind of a fit, that you connect with who they are, right? Like what's the main software that people in the kind of job you're applying to use, or the main industry, like trade magazines or certifications that they get? What are some of the biggest problems or trends in that field? Let's get a little sociological here for a second. When we talk about networking, I want to root this in some literature that's come out. So we know from the literature that hiring is not just about making sure you have basic qualifications for a job, but increasingly we see that it's a matter of culture matching. So there was this classic study done by Lauren Rivera where she interviews hiring managers at these elite firms and basically finds out that they're very much looking for these like culture matches. And then there's some more recent study. When people are hiring, they're looking for someone who has these characteristics, so like they get it, they fit in, they think they'd get along with the team, they're a match for the organization. And so those are very vague, right? And so it's not just sometimes having these basic items on your resume, but it's somehow being able to display to the hiring manager that you're this culture match. And so from the social literature, we know that's called cultural capital, right? And that can come in different formats. Bourdieu talks about it, embodied, institutionalized, et cetera. So what does that look like? And we'll dive into that briefly. But then I want to add one more piece to this conversation, and that is the literature on social networks. This article in particular talked about how they were looking at undergraduates' use of LinkedIn and how it benefits students if faculty actually put assignments above LinkedIn into the curriculum to help them kind of build their network. But I want you to think about what a social network is. So here's like a network diagram. When we talk about networking, it's not just the idea that you're adding contacts to your Rolodex, that you have more people that you could message if you want, or the reason that I'm saying like it's good to get connections on LinkedIn is not just because you want some number count and that's impressive. It's because each person represents a node in a pre-existing network. So the idea of networking is recognizing where are you in this network? And you may be nowhere, especially if you're not sure what you want to be moving into. But imagine these different color sections as like industries or fields. So, this big block here, maybe this is biotech, in San Diego or something. And then over here is healthcare. And, there's some connections between them, but they're these kind of dense colonies. And so one of the reasons that I would argue it's very important that you have at least a field that you're interested in going into is that you can start to identify where in this network do you want to position yourself as a node? Because you want them to be able to find you. And you don't want to just, for example, if your LinkedIn says something like you're a social major and you're looking for internship opportunities so you can get some professional experience, that's nice, but that's very generic. It doesn't position you towards something, right? Whereas if you say, I'm aspiring, HR professional in the biotech space, well, that starts to become quite a bit more nuanced. And so, various people in the nodes can start to think of you in that way. Like, oh, you're somebody who is moving in a specific direction. So you actually want to, in terms of positioning yourself, you're branding yourself. You want people to be able to think of you as like, oh, that's that person that's really into like marketing, or, oh, that's that person that's really into, accounting. And it's also important to note that you can do this in a couple of ways. There's an industry or like a field, right? Healthcare, education, social work. But then there's cross-functional roles, HR, accounting, marketing, et cetera. So you get like two ways you can select on this. You can decide what kind of cross-functional roles you think you'd like to play, and then also what industries are you most interested in. And the more you can specify, the easier it is to brand yourself. And to make yourself a node in that network. And then it's also easier to figure out what cultural capital you need to absorb. So if you're like, well, I just want to keep my options open, so I'm going to apply I'm open to any industry and almost any role. The problem is the network has a hard time recognizing you as being positioned somewhere in it. But then also it's hard for you to know what cultural capital you need. And when I say cultural capital, I mean things that are relevant to that position so that the hiring manager hears in your language that you're kind of a fit, that you connect with who they are, right? Like what's the main software that people in the kind of job you're applying to use, or the main industry, like trade magazines or certifications that they get? What are some of the biggest problems or trends in that field? And then, of course, there's the cultural capital of the company you're applying to, where you could learn a little bit about it. And the easiest way to learn, it's easier to learn about an industry than a company specifically, because learning about the industry, I mean, you could ask ChatGPT, you can Google, but definitely informational interviewing is helpful. But you need to be talking to real people to find out about a company, right? If you're actually applying to a specific place, get onto LinkedIn, see if you can't figure out someone who works there, set up an informational interview, find out some things about the company. But it's a very different kind of presentation of self to come in and know some of the jargon, right? Know some of the issues that people in that profession face, even if you've never had a job in it. Then somebody who might be enthusiastic, but they're like, hey, I'm just looking for anything, right? And so it's easy to think that we're maximizing our chances by keeping our options broad, but we're actually causing ourselves not to stand out as much to a hiring manager. So, and some students will say like, okay, well, am I overly like narrowing myself if I start presenting myself as being interested in this specific kind of cross-functional role within a specific industry? And what I would say is you can still pivot, right? You're no worse off applying to something outside of that than if you just had a kind of generic resume that was open to anything. There are opportunities that can be opportunistic that you didn't expect that land in your lap, but the odds of standing out to companies in that niche are much higher. Then there's targeting. This is more advanced. I'll get into that in a moment, but most of what I'm talking about today is this positioning. It's the entry level of networking. And so first is your passive presence. Like you need them to be able to find you. And that's mainly going to be LinkedIn, although the rest of your internet footprint is part of it. So if you'll want to do a quick, check through, Google your name, for example, on maybe somebody else's computer. So that all the algorithms and cookies aren't linked to you, but see what pops up when your name is in there. What you're hoping for is that your LinkedIn profile is the number one hit for you, because that's the first impression. And of course, you probably have multiple social media accounts, but then do a quick, sanitization if you have some pictures or posts that are popping up on the first couple pages of Google that maybe don't present you in the best light. So, when you're ready to start applying, that's one thing is, you kind of clean up some of your internet presence, but then bolster your LinkedIn. And then beyond your internet presence, it's also your reputation, and that you have, like I've mentioned, an identifiable niche in an area. And that could just be very small things you've done, like you got a micro credential, or you did a micro internship, or you've got some just minimal experiences that you may or may not have full work experience in this area, but you can still begin positioning yourself. You can post articles or responses to things on LinkedIn about that industry, about that niche, and it just starts kind of branding your web presence. And then learning, it's picking up the cultural capital. So number one, web and AI. Go to ChatGPT, be like, tell it, you are an experienced, fill in the blank, professional with 20 years experience or whatever, and I'm informationally interviewing you about the field. And then you can start asking it questions, and it will respond to you as if it were a professional in that field. You can ask it, what software should I know? What are some of the main issues going on in the industry? What are professional associations or websites should I look at? You can ask it a lot of questions, as if you can practice your informational interviewing almost on it before you start informationally interviewing real people, which of course is what you do want to move towards next. And of course, ChatGPT is also a great place to give you questions that you'll ask. But you'll jump on LinkedIn, you'll find professionals working in the areas you're interested in, and you ask if you can have a coffee chat, 15 minutes. And you have a handful of questions ready. In professionalization tactics, I have one lesson all about your informational interviewing, the kind of questions you should ask, a script for emailing them. But LinkedIn is great for that. And you'll learn pretty quickly from those interviews if this is an industry you want to keep pursuing or not. But it's also a way to be absorbing cultural capital because it's low stakes. This is not actually a job interview. It's just a coffee chat to learn more about it, right? and you'll be learning from them, like, what kinds of certifications you need, what kinds of jargon you should know. What are some of the big things going on in the field right now? Or why'd you get into this? What's a day in the job look like? What would you recommend for someone like me to begin preparing for this? And you have it with this mindset of curiosity. You just approach it willing to learn. And that is, you're beginning to absorb that cultural capital, so that when you are finally in an interview, you're talking like somebody from that field. And the hiring manager is like, oh, this is a culture match. Like, they kind of get it. And then the more advanced networking, which I call targeting, which I won't go into a ton right now, but that's once you've already really positioned yourself in as a node in an existing kind of network or field. You already have some of the basic cultural capital, and now you're being real strategic. And so you start to identify who knows who within a few companies or a few specific kinds of roles. And so like that's not that helpful for you if you're still figuring out where you want to go or what you want to do. But once you've kind of developed some of that positionality, you start looking for actual people, specific targets, and then you make specific requests of them. So you wouldn't ask someone, like contact someone and be like, hey, who do you know that's in this field? And can you just introduce me to some people? Like, you want to do your homework. And so you'll identify someone. Maybe it's one of your faculty members. Maybe it's a past colleague or someone you kind of know at a company. And you say, hey, I know that you know so-and-so because you worked on this project with them, or something like that. Could you introduce me by email to them? And so you make very specific targets and requests. People almost always say yes when you've done your homework already and you're simply asking them to make an introduction. But if you're saying like, do some research for me, like, who do you think I could be talking to? Or, if the harder the request, the more likely they won't have time for it. But if it's something very specific and very targeted, very, very often you're gonna get some help. And maybe once in a while someone says no, but usually people are willing to help each other out. And then the last one's just kind of a mindset, this helpfulness thing, right? Give more than you expect to get. And you'll hear this advice online all the time. But the idea is once you have that kind of network that you're investing in, you want to just be nice to these people. You're messaging them with, oh, here's an article I think you'd like, or anything where you can kind of be of service. The last thing you want to do is only contact certain people when you have a need from them, right? So it's sort of like, offer some value to them, be friendly to them a couple times, then ask for help or assistance on something. But you kind of want to keep that reciprocity up. And if someone does help you, they write a letter of recommendation for you, they introduce you to someone, they tell you a kind of an key informational thing about a job that came open, always follow up. You always want to go back to that faculty person, that professional colleague, and thank them. Tell them what happened. Hey, I applied, didn't work out, but still, I totally appreciate it. Or if it did work out, hey, I got that internship or I got that thing. Oh, you'd be amazed at how many students don't follow back up after they've asked for help. And that really makes it more likely that I want to help you again in the future, right? If I've heard from you, like, oh, I wrote you that letter and you actually got into that program or you got hired at that place, then a year or two later, you want something else, it's just nice. It sets you apart.